Well, I like to say if you were stuck on a desert island and only had one food, and a food that you could keep without refrigeration, it would be cheese. Cheese is actually a complete food, and you don't need any other food if you eat cheese.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey everybody, I'm your host Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 218 and our guest is Fallon Morell. Most of us know Sally as the founder of the Weston A. Price Foundation. But did you know that she is an avid cheesemaker as well? Today, Sally tells us about the surprising nutrient density and health benefits of cheese. She talks about how cheese got its start and how it is made. She also tells us why it's her favorite food and how to incorporate more of it into our diets. I learned a thing or two in this conversation, including the fact that cheese is highly probiotic, even more so than yogurt. Before we dive into the conversation, a quick shout out to our sponsors. Trust Merchant Services, not your usual credit card processing company. Any U.S. business that takes credit cards, Trust Merchant Services can take care of you. Experienced and nicer than other credit card processing companies and with super low rates. Trust Merchant Services can help you. Reach out to Jessica at trustmerchantservice.com. Trust Merchant Services, not your usual credit card processing company. And grass-fed tallow by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced, nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and tallow in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Consuming tallow supports fertility, hormone health, and provides nourishment for growth and development, healthy bones, teeth, gums, and skin. So visit Ancestral Supplements today to see what they can do for you. Go to ancestralsupplements.com. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Sally.
Thank you, Hilda. It's great to be back.
We are going to talk about one of my favorite foods today.
Cheese, right? And in the spirit of full disclosure, I am a cheesemaker. We make cheese on our farm, and I am the one who makes the cheese. So it is a subject very dear to my heart. And as you say, it's the world's most delicious food.
When did you start making cheese?
Well, we started making cheese in 2011 on our farm and opened our shop in November of 2011. And we've been selling cheese ever since, won a few awards, and yeah, it's been great.
It's fantastic. One of my daughters is like, please get cheese from Sally's farm. She loves it so much. So I want to talk to you today about what makes cheese so good besides the fact that it's delicious. Talk to us about its nutrient profile.
Well, I like to say if you were stuck on a desert island and only had one food, and a food that you could keep without refrigeration, it would be cheese. Cheese is actually a complete food, and you don't need any other food if you eat cheese. So what's in cheese? Well, all the fat-soluble vitamins that we think are so important, vitamins A, D, and it is really our best source of vitamin K in the Western diet. That's Dr. Price's X Factor. All the B vitamins are in cheese, including the really important ones, B6 and B12. Calcium, of course, and you know, we really do need a good source of calcium in our diets. If we didn't have cheese or milk, we'd have to be eating bones or something. So calcium and phosphorus, it's a great source of zinc, which is a very important mineral. Magnesium. Another surprising thing about cheese is that it's a source of iodine, so it's very good for the thyroid gland. So as you can see, I could go on and on. It's really got all the things we need in it. And if it's raw cheese, it will have vitamin C, and it will be highly probiotic. Raw cheese is more probiotic than yogurt. It has more types of good bacteria and actually just more of the good bacteria than yogurt has.
This is blowing my mind because I also feel like a lot of people are against cheese. In other words, they avoid dairy altogether. Why is that, do you think, Sally?
Well, there are people who really do have sensitivities to dairy and can't eat milk or cheese for various reasons. Now, one thing that's not in the cheese is lactose, because that's all consumed by the bacteria when the cheese is being fermented. So a lot of people who can't do milk can do cheese because there's no lactose in it. A lot of the criticism of cheese comes because it's a high-fat food, and that fat is butter fat, which is highly saturated fat. So you get groups like the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, call it irresponsible medicine. But anyway, they are a front for the soy industry, and they're promoting the soy cheese, this fake soy cheese. So they've been out there saying how terrible it is that children get cheese in their school lunches because it's full of saturated fat.
And are they having an influence on what's in those lunches?
I don't think so much anymore. In fact, what I hear from people who run these school cafeterias is if they add cheese to whatever it is they're serving the children will eat it. And cheese is, to me, a wonderful snack for children. When we were traveling and our children were young, we always had the little container with little cubes of cheese, and I thought that was much better to give them than Cheerios. And cheese is a high-fat food. In fact, it has got a great nutrient profile. It's very high in fat, moderate protein, and that, of course, that'll be complete protein. And it's got some carbs also. So it is really a great food for young and old.
Absolutely. Now, when you're talking about cheese, are you saying these are the properties of raw cheese only, or does this include pasteurized?
Well, I don't want to be too hard on pasteurized cheese. First of all, one interesting thing, you cannot make cheese out of ultra-pasteurized milk. So ultra-pasteurized milk is so dead, you can't ferment it. So that's one good thing. If you're buying cheese, well, it might not be the world's best milk. It's going to be pasteurized, but it's not ultra-pasteurized. There was a very interesting study in Japan about dairy consumption among pregnant women and growing children. And yes, they do eat a lot of dairy products in Japan. I know it's surprising, but Japan has many dairies. These were all founded by the Americans after the Second World War. So they looked at milk and cheese, and this is all pasteurized milk, pasteurized cheese. The women and children who drank pasteurized milk did not have particularly good bone density or calcium balance, but the ones who were eating the cheese did have good bone density and good calcium balance. So what this tells me is, even if you're starting out with pasteurized milk, there's something about the cheese making process that is going to make this more digestible and the calcium more available. So again, it's a really amazing food. And if it's raw, even better, because if it's raw, then you will have the vitamin C and the probiotics.
This encourages me because I know there are people who have trouble accessing raw milk and raw cheese. And so what you're saying is an endorsement of cheese across the board.
Yes. In fact,
across the cheese board.
Across the cheese board. Very good. So when my children were growing up, I was able to get raw milk for them when they were very small. But then the whole atmosphere for raw milk got really restrictive in California. And so what I fed them was cream. So like diluted cream was their milk. And then I fed them lots and lots of cheese. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't particularly raw cheese. And they grew fine, nice and tall and healthy, robust children. So I do think cheese is one of those foods that if your diet's not perfect, if you live in an area where you can't access all these things, cheese and, of course, butter are two foods that you can still eat.
And so how does our body access the nutrients in cheese? Is it easy to digest?
Well, cheese is a pre-digested food. I mean, the fermentation process is a pre-digestive process for sure.
So it's easily assimilated into our bodies, the nutrients, I mean.
Yes, it should be. Yes, and in fact, this Japanese study showed us this. And I'm particularly concerned with children and what children are getting during their growing years. They do need a good source of calcium. And I've been talking to our board member, Pam Schoenfeld, who's a dietitian in private practice. And she said, we need to be concerned about how much calcium our children are getting. They're not getting enough. They should be getting 1,500 milligrams per day. That's just several ounces of cheese. And there's really no other good way of getting it except raw milk. And a lot of people can't get raw milk or are afraid of raw milk. So she said, this is a big problem in America today, is getting enough calcium.
And since one of the prongs of the foundation is activism, is there some way we can advocate for cheese?
Well, I think we always have been. So, raw cheese is one of those products it's available. It's legal. You can make it in every state. Most health food stores carry raw cheese. However, you do need to be careful in America because They are allowed to say a cheese is raw if it's been heated to 150 degrees, which is not raw. Raw is under 110. In Europe, that cheese heated to 150 degrees has to be called thermized, but they don't have to do that here. They can just say raw. So you need to be very careful, and that's where our shopping guide comes in, because we only put truly raw cheeses in our best category. And if we find a cheese that says raw, we always check with them and say, how high do you heat your cheese? So if it's not in our best category, it's not raw. But then let me just say, our shopping guide, we try not to demonize food. So it's either in good or best. We don't say this brand is horrible. We just say we have our good and our best. So there's lots of cheeses in the good category that aren't raw, but that are still fine for people to eat.
Yeah, when I was hiking in Australia in a very remote region, I took some cheese with me because I was like, I need something, because I knew I was going to be fed whatever the hiking organizers were going to feed me, and I knew I would need some good stuff. I took cheese, liverwurst, and butter.
Well, I'm not sure the liverwurst would last on a hike in the heat, but the cheese certainly would, and the butter certainly would. And cheese is a storage food, just the way salami and charcuterie is a storage food for pork. And you can even do that with beef. But these are foods that are meant to last in the heat without refrigeration. We didn't have refrigeration until 150 years ago. So, yeah.
So because you've studied so many dietary traditions, who first came up with cheese, do you think?
Well, they say it happened when someone put some milk in so they used the forestomach of a calf as a kind of bag. And they put the milk in there and riding on their horse, and it was shaking. And when they got there, it was cheese, because the rennet is in that forestomach. So they figured out how to add that to the milk to make cheese.
What's interesting to me is I see sometimes vegetarian cheeses and they don't use rennet, and I think, how do they do it?
Well, actually, there's two types of rennet. Now I'm talking as a cheesemaker now. There's two types of rennet, and there's two things you do to the milk to make cheese. First, you add a culture. But that in itself is not enough to get your good separation of curds and whey. Then you add your rennet, and that is like a secondary fermentation. So cheese has actually been fermented twice. And there are two types of rennet. Animal rennet comes from the forestomach of a calf who's never had anything but his mother's milk. And so they kill the calf at a young age. And this is why all cheese-making cultures eat veal. Like you think of veal in Switzerland or France, because they need to get the rennet. And they soak the stomach and get the rennet. And we use animal rennet on our farm. There's also a vegetarian rennet. What people don't realize, it's made with bacteria, and these are genetically modified bacteria. The production of vegetarian rennet was the first commercial use for a genetically modified organism. So this was going to take the costs out of cheese making, you see. And most rennet used today is vegetarian rennet.
Coming up, Sally explains how cheese first came to be. And she also goes into why traditionally made cheese is far healthier than a lot of what we see in our grocery stores today.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Trust Merchant Services, not your usual credit card processing company. Any U.S. business that takes credit cards, Trust Merchant Services can facilitate that process. More affordable and nicer than other credit card processing companies, Trust Merchant Services has experience with a wide variety of U.S.-based businesses. Whether it's retail, a restaurant, an online, or a nonprofit business, Trust Merchants can help. Trust Merchants' rates are low and stay low. No contracts or termination fees are needed. Customer service is unparalleled. I've spoken with Jessica, and she is amazing. I love that she gives 2% of the profits from her company back to a not-for-profit every year. So reach out to Jessica through her website, trustmerchantservice.com. Trust Merchant Services, not your usual credit card processing company. And grass-fed tallow by Ancestral Supplements. According to Cabeza de Vaca, the Native Americans are the people with the most well-formed bodies and of the greatest vitality and capacity. What kind of foods produced such fine physical bodies, well-formed, strong, resistant to degenerative disease, and cavity-free? All were based on nose-to-tail dining and fat. They hunted the older animals because they had built up a thick slab of fat along the back. Our DNA evolved with the nourishment of liver, heart, kidney, pancreas, spleen, and a whole lot of fat. The fat was always saved, sometimes by rendering, stored in the paunch, bladder, or large intestine, and consumed with dried or smoked meat or pemmican. Used in this way, fat contributed almost 80% of total calories in the diets of the northern Indians. Most prized was the internal kidney fat of ruminant animals. Consuming tallow supports fertility, hormone health, and provides nourishment for growth and development, healthy bones, teeth, gums, and skin. So visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
People who are very sensitive to additives, to MSG, cannot eat cheese made with vegetarian rennet. It makes them sick. And a perfect example of this was Jack Samuels. You may remember Jack is no longer with us, but Jack founded the Truth in Labeling website about, making people aware of where the MSG is in our food because it's mostly not labeled. So he really thought that the vegetarian rennet somehow resulted in MSG being in the cheese. So we don't use vegetarian rennet. Making cheese does involve killing animals. There's no question. I once had someone call me who was a vegetarian, and he said, I finally figured out that cheese is an animal food we can eat and we don't kill any animals. And I said, well, just wait a minute. I said, I'm a cheesemaker. We have a farm. I said, you don't keep those animals if they don't produce milk because you can't afford to. And he said, oh, he hadn't thought of that. So he didn't want to do the interview after that.
Oh, too bad.
Yeah. But cheese making is like any other process on the farm. You hopefully treat the animals well and kindly, and they're in good health. But in the end, they go because you can't afford to feed animals that are not productive.
So talk to us a little bit about the risks that some raw soft cheeses especially might bring. I've heard that those aren't recommended for pregnant women. Why is that, Sally?
Okay, very good question. Pregnant women, and I agree with this, pregnant women need to be very careful about ingesting listeria. Listeria is the real bad actor as far as pathogens are concerned, and it can cause a woman to have a miscarriage. But where is the listeria? Well, the two greatest sources are luncheon meats and soft, unaged cheeses, whether they're pasteurized or raw. So in my book, the Nourishing Traditions book of baby and child care, I say pregnant women should not eat soft, unaged cheeses and the commercial luncheon meats. It's interesting, the government says, well, pregnant women shouldn't drink raw milk because they could get listeria from raw milk. We actually did a FOIA request to find out how many cases of illness had been attributed to listeria in raw milk, and the answer was 0. They had no cases of listeria in raw milk. Listeria doesn't like raw milk. It just doesn't last there. There are some others that can be there, but not listeria, not the bad one. But listeria gets into the cheese-making process because your plant is dirty. And it's not, kept up, kept clean. And it doesn't matter whether you're working with raw milk or pasteurized milk. It's the same risk when you're making cheese.
And soft cheeses in general, however, are rarely available in the U.S. Is that right?
Oh, yes, they are. I mean, cream cheese is a soft cheese. Okay. So cream cheese or camembert. You see, raw cheese has to be aged 60 days, and cheese aged 60 days is not going to be soft. They get firm by 60.
Okay, I understand now. I was thinking super fancy with the raw cheese, but I guess, cream cheese, camembert.
Boursin, which is one of my favorite cheeses, Boursin. It's always made with pasteurized milk, I think. It seems like it's going to be safer. I'm not sure that it is, because you have to be just as clean if you're working with pasteurized milk. Because what the listeria gets in after the cheese is made, and then it takes 2 months or more to get rid of it again, where the good bacteria are crowded out. So this is why they're saying, unaged cheese is a problem. It's a risk factor.
But you're not afraid.
No, well, no. I would love to make a soft unaged cheese, and there are some that are allowed in France. That's not a sword I'm willing to throw myself on right now. I just think there's more important things that we need to do, like get raw milk available for everyone.
Right, yeah. Right. Totally. So talk to us about, as we start to wrap up, talk to us about your favorite cheeses and which you think people should try more of.
Well, when we set up our farm, we were in southern Maryland, which is not an area with a history of cheese making. And not, I would say, to put it mildly, not a very sophisticated area as far as food is concerned. So I thought we should make cheeses that are familiar to people. So I don't want to make any weird cheeses or stinky cheeses, So we make cheddar, which is my favorite cheese, or at least it was until we started making Jack. And we make an aged Jack that's really like a fine cheese, and that's the one that's won the most awards. And I think that's my favorite now. But we also make blue cheese, and that, that's caught on there too. So people, even unsophisticated palates like the blue cheese. Yeah.
And what are some dishes that, if some of us are like cheese novices, we should try that you would recommend using the cheese for?
Well, I have a wonderful recipe for a cheese spread in my book, Nourishing Diets. And you can make it with raw cheese. And you make it in a Cuisinart, a food processor. You grate the cheese, and you add some melted butter and sherry and some seasonings, and it is delicious. And so that's completely raw. Another one of my favorite dishes is what they call Welsh rabbit or Welsh rarebit. That's in Nourishing Traditions, and that's just delicious. And you only heat the cheese very lightly. It does make a melted sauce, but I think all the enzymes are still intact.
That sounds so good. And these dishes sound great for the holidays.
Yeah. Growing up, that was one of my dad's favorite meals was Welsh rabbit. And we had this, it's like a beautiful beautiful cheese sauce on toast.
I just want to ask you a couple more questions as we wrap up. Some people are concerned about high cholesterol. Does cheese impact that at all?
Well, cheese has a lot of cholesterol because it's a high-fat food. And often when we're selling our cheese in the farmer's market, someone will come along and say, "Oh, I'd love to eat your cheese, but my cardiologist would kill me." And our response to that is, you eat our cheese and you can go to your cardiologist's funeral. So cheese, this is so silly. I mean, the whole cholesterol thing is fraudulent, as you know, but since cheese is one of our best sources of vitamin K, vitamin K is what keeps your arteries from hardening. Vitamin K makes sure the calcium goes into your bones and teeth, the hard tissues, and not in the soft tissues like your arteries. So cheese is highly protective against heart disease. And I once read a paper by some Dutch researchers who said, here's cheese, it's full of vitamin K, it's potentially very good for combating heart disease, but it's in this food that's high in saturated fat and cholesterol, so we can't recommend it. So you see how this theory about saturated fat and cholesterol has really impacted all of the advice that people are getting, including what they're hearing about cheese.
And didn't Ansel Keys on his deathbed say that the cholesterol we ingest doesn't affect the cholesterol in our bloodstream?
I don't know if it was his deathbed. He lived a long time, so okay. But I have heard that he did say that the cholesterol we eat has nothing to do with the cholesterol levels in the blood. Mm-hmm. But I think what the response to that would be, well, it's the saturated fat. Yes, so there is a lot of saturated fat in cheese, and your body needs saturated fat, so it's nothing to worry about.
Awesome. So now I want to wrap up with a final question. I usually ask, what's one thing the listener could do to improve their health? But maybe I should say, what's one thing the listener could do to include more cheese in their diet?
Yes, well, make cheese your favorite snack food because it is a wonderful food. It's highly nutritious. It nourishes your body. It keeps your blood sugar stable because it is high in fat. So you can have a meal of cheese and you go all afternoon without having a blood sugar drop. And again, it's a great food for children because it keeps them from being cranky and crabby between meals.
So forget the pretzels and chips.
Yes, absolutely. Forget the pretzels and chips and go for the cheese.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for this time, Sally.
Thank you, Hilda.
Our guest today was Sally Fallon Morell. Find Sally's blog at nourishingtraditions.com. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the show notes for this and every podcast that we put out, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody, and see you next time.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.